Tonight on the Bigfooty Cats podcast, we dissect what went wrong and what went really wrong in the 2014 finals series, discuss Chris Scott's coaching performance throughout the season, and share our thoughts on Mitch Clark and the other list management issues. Don't go anywhere, because all that and more is coming right up.
We're blue and white, there's not a doubt. We play the game to win. A team that knows commitment, that's the way it's always been. We rise up to the challenge, we give the game our all. With sheer determination, we go in for the ball. When the crowd thunders, go Cats, we break the banner down. We know they'll play with courage till the final siren sounds. And the rival team will know that they've been run down by a pack. When you're beaten by, defeated by the Cats. In a cat attack, go Cats.
Guys, welcome back to the Bigfooty Cats podcast. I'm here, first of all, with SJ. How you going?
Very well. Season's over. Looking forward to the cricket season. But yeah, great to be back on the Bigfooty Cats podcast.
And once again, we're joined by the Jester. How are things?
Yeah, good mate. Very happy to be here after a long absence and looking forward to breaking down what went wrong.
My name, of course, is Gyson. We're hoping to be joined by Pure Ownage tonight, but he's hasn't turned up, so unfortunately we'll have to wait until next time, hopefully, to get him on board. We'll kick us off with...
I hope he hasn't been delisted.
Adding to the long list there. We'll kick things off with a tip for the Karji boys. Not necessarily the winner, bit of a prediction for the best and fairest tomorrow night.
I think my prediction is Mitch Duncan to finish top three. I think he had a very consistent year. He probably improved his output 10% or so.
Yep.
Had a couple of quiet games, but on the whole was very consistent, and I think that will sort of pay off under the Karji voting system.
Okay, Jester?
I'll put my neck on the line and say Jared Rivers, top five.
Oh, wow. Top five. For me, I'm going to say Enright to finish outside the top 10. I think he might just be overlooked just a little bit this year. So we'll kick it off with a look back at the finals. A disappointing final series, of course, overall. Not what we're all hoping for, considering the home and away season we had, finishing top four and all that good stuff. SJ, the scores.
Yeah, that's right. So, qualifying final, the Cats were level at halftime against the Hawks, who then, of course, went on to win the premiership. But final scores: Hawthorn 15-14, 104, Geelong 10-8, 68. So in the second half, Hawthorn steamrolled over the Cats, winning by 6 goals. My first impressions of this game were that, look, I didn't expect to win. However, being in the game at halftime, I was pretty disappointed that the second half sort of petered out the way that many of the games this year have for the Cats.
Yep. Really
weak second half. But also I thought that, and what really impressed me about Hawthorn on this night, but also throughout their final series, and what disappointed me the most about the Cats, was not in the skill or in taking your chances, which, look, are difficult things, but not so much attitudinal things. But it was really that Hawthorn were far more aggressive at the man and at the ball than Geelong were. And I thought that was very obvious right from the word go. And I mean, I watched all 3 Hawthorn finals, and apart from the last 10 minutes of their game against Port, they were very much putting every single ounce of effort into smothers, tackles, bumps, and so on. And it's amazing how further down the field from that chain, how that plays out to be a score for your own team. And I think that this is probably a trend of Geelong across the finals, but Hawthorn had, I think, 66 more disposals than the Cats in this game.
Yep.
However, they also laid 22 more tackles.
Yep.
Now, one of my tweets got on Tweet the Coach about that, and Chris Scott sort of watered it down, saying it doesn't really say much about attitude. But surely it does say something about attitude if a team with far more of the ball also lays, a third as many tackles. I just think Hawthorn were there to play, and the Cats weren't quite switched on.
I think that's a really good point. That's always one big key indicator in, well, an absolute smashing, but let alone in a final, is the team with more of the ball. For them to get anywhere close to the team that they're smashing in the tackle count, let alone significantly beat them, it just shows so much more hunger for the contest. What did you think, Chester?
Well, I can't remember if it was the North game or the Hawthorn game, but Champion Data tweeted a stat about tackle completions.
Yep.
And I can't remember it exactly off memory, but it suggested that we were running at a similar level in tackle attempts, but that we weren't successfully completing the tackle, which I guess means the opposition was able to get a disposal off after the tackle was attempted.
Yep.
I thought that was really noticeable that someone would commit to a tackle and then just wouldn't be able to make it stick, and the opposition player would be able to get a handball off. And usually, against Hawthorn as well, usually a clean handball that found a target. And then you're sort of a man down in the contest already, and they were able to run it out. So, like, I agree, I'm sure it partly was effort, and I think we'll talk later about sort of the defensive running and the lack of defensive running. But I also wonder if it's just that we're not as physically mature as we need to be to compete with these top sides.
Yep. SJ, moving on to the North game, which I guess probably most of us would have expected to scrape through in, but unfortunately North were the hungrier side on the day.
Yeah, well, I mean, they jumped us early, didn't they? I think they got out to a 5-goal lead about 20 minutes in, and I was having flashbacks to the 2012 final against Fremantle, where they did a very similar thing. It was probably a bit more of an overwhelming performance in that game against Fremantle. But it was just that thing where the first 20 minutes, 30 minutes of the game really cost us, and then we spent the rest of the game, 3 quarters, trying to get back in it. And even though we got very close to getting back in it was almost like we never had that extra 5 minutes that we really could have pinched the game. So I'm not sure, again, why that happened. I mean, Lindsay Thomas kicked 3 in the first 10 minutes on James Kelly. Yep. And again, well, I mean, we've spoken about it for years, but there again is our weakness against fast running forward.
It's the small / medium defender.
But that's right, yeah. And we've got an ex-midfielder who's, 30, 31 years old. Certainly wasn't quick in his day. Certainly isn't any quicker now. Playing on, a sort of a quicksilver type forward. He kicks 3 in the first. Well, he kicks 1 in the first 18 seconds. So after that, the game's tied. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just these. I guess these runs of goals that the Cats have conceded all year. Generally in the second half, but there was one in this game in the first 20 minutes, which almost took the sting out of the game from the get-go.
Jester, what did you think of the North game?
Oh, that Kelly getting opened up by Thomas reminded me of the qualifying final in 2007 when we played Paul Chapman off Glenn Archer, and just Archer looked old and slow, and he got aggro and just gave away a stack of frees.
Yeah. And
it was just this really sort of calculated, ruthless move of we know that this is the weak link and we're going to relentlessly target it. And it worked. And I mean, I thought in both games Kelly had horror first quarters and then tightened up a bit. But yeah, the damage was done. And the fact he was allegedly injured in the warm-up and they didn't replace him, it was just, came across as a pretty poor selection decision.
Yep, definitely. So going on from that point, what did we miss most in the finals? Was it that lockdown defender that we've missed for so long?
Ruckman would have helped.
Sorry?
I'll put my hand up for a Ruckman. Put my hand up for a Ruckman against Todd Goldstein.
That definitely would have helped. Dawson Simpson going down for the second year in a row definitely cost us dearly.
And also against Hawthorn, just with David Hale. David Hale pushed forward a few times against McIntosh, who was really struggling by that stage in the year. And yeah, a number 1 ruck would have been great.
Now, P.O., a late inclusion, has just decided to join us. How you going, P.O. Ronich?
Yeah, not bad. I did a Mitch Clark. I just went away for a while. There you go. My Skype was depressed.
Well, like Mitch Clark, you've picked the perfect time to come back and help us. What do you think we missed most during the final series, Pio?
Look, we missed a few things. How long am I allowed to talk about Ruckman for? A while.
We'll give you 90 seconds.
I've already done it.
Look, yeah, that was kind of a rhetorical question. We missed a fair bit, I think, and I curse our luck because every year, as is, the Geelong way for the last 2 or 3 years, we seem to have all our players fit when we don't need them, and then they suddenly get injured about 2 weeks before finals when we do need them.
Yeah.
So I think like personnel and injuries were a massive issue for us in finals. Obviously, not just with our rucks, but with Jono and a few others. So I think that really, really hurt us. But I think mainly just probably what you saw in the finals was like all year we were inconsistent within games. And, in 2 of our finals, we probably played 3 quarters and you can't win on that. So I think that's pretty much what caused it.
What do you think, Chester?
I'll disagree slightly. I think it was sort of having midfield depth and having the guys out there be fit. Motlop was just hobbling around and looked a shadow of the player he was. And even Hall Smith, I reckon, was carrying something or just feeling the effects of a long season. So if those guys had been fit and playing at the kind of level they'd shown they could in the middle of the season, and if Christensen had been fit, then I reckon we would have been a lot more competitive. I
think you're on the money there. The previous game against North Melbourne, I think, was our best, up there with our best performance in the season. And I'm fairly sure, looking back, it was that game that we really saw Motlop and Christensen, and even Hall Smith to an extent, really standing up and showing some of their best form, even though we didn't see them playing together for much of the year, but really working together well in that game. And then to come up against Hawthorn and then further against North Melbourne, have those guys under injury clouds, it just really showed how much those important players not being up to scratch really hurt us.
I believe that game was I think the first time for the year that we'd had our best midfield on the park at once.
Yeah, I remember thinking before that game, this is our best 22, bar Menzel. Yeah.
And we almost didn't quite get it back. I mean, some of them were there, but not fit for the rest of the year. So it was really one of those years where to be any sort of chance, we needed the very best 22 on the park.
Yep.
And obviously we didn't quite even get close to that in the end. But I think the other thing about the final series, to me, not just the ruck, the lack of aggression we've already discussed, but I guess when we lost control of the ball, the other team scored quite easily. In both games, particularly the second half of the Hawthorn game and also what North Melbourne did to us. We'd spent a lot of energy getting the ball into a scoring position, and we probably did it as many times as the opposition, but because our forward line is not very potent and also there's not much pressure down there, the minute it came out, the coast-to-coast type goals looked very easy, and I remember seeing the numbers, like in both games, the opposition had far more uncontested possessions than us. I've got the North Melbourne one up here now. In that game, it was North Melbourne 230, Geelong 152. So they're going like 2-1. Oh, sorry, 3-2, which just shows a lot of the time they had the ball when they could choose what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I think, at the end of the day, we had a great last quarter. Hawkins kicked 4 goals or whatever it was. We almost got back in it. But if we'd stolen that game, would have been robbery, really.
Yeah. I think for me that probably symptomised the midfield though, because I kind of in the first half I sat where the cheer squad was, so I got a pretty good view of North's short kicking game, and I wouldn't hang too much of it on the defence. I mean, I thought more broadly our defence was actually really, really good this year, considering we basically don't have a player under 30 in the defence. I thought we pretty much had close to the best defence in the league. But when you have that many guys getting uncontested kicks between the wing and forward 50, it's not your defenders that are actually causing that, because they don't get far enough up to push into that space to begin with. I think it was symptom of, we have a lot of inexperienced players in the midfield who probably there's some aren't as fit enough, like probably, a good example of that is Hall and Smith, but some of the others don't know where to go and when to go, like a lot of our previous midfielders did. And so we're prone to other midfields can outrun us and they can run to smarter spots and get a lot of uncontested possession. I wouldn't ring it on the defence too much. I actually thought even in that game, I thought our defence probably kept us in it in the first half, considering we barely touched the ball. But it's just our midfield wasn't covering anywhere near well enough.
Well, going on from that, why was our midfield group, particularly around stoppages, regularly subpar? Because we look at our season, we've got Selwood, Johnson, Stokes, Duncan, Caddy, Guthrie, and even Christensen at times had fairly good years, or at least good patches. But why was our midfield group not able to work as a good cohesive unit all season long? SJ?
I think probably you hit the nail on the head there where you talked about patches. It's hard to find a player who sort of was there for the 22 weeks, bringing his A game at least, if not A plus game, but certainly just a sort of a baseline good game every week. Most of those were injured or suspended for some part, either playing injured or out for a number of months. And I think that, we've only listed 7 names there, that's 7 midfielders, and they're all pretty good. But teams are batting down to sort of 10 and 12 midfielders, and even the Cats a few years ago were doing the same. So not only do we probably not have the depth on the field, but apart from that second North game that you talked about earlier, probably we didn't actually get that whole set up and running at once at all.
What do you think, Jester?
Yeah, no, I would totally agree. And I think, I think one of the interesting dynamics is, and we'll probably talk about it a little bit later, is I think there was a general feeling we didn't get enough games into young players this year, which I think is true to an extent. But I think one thing they did do really well is transition the chief midfield responsibilities to Caddy, Guthrie, Hall and Smith, and then Selwood on top of that. But so they're all still sort of learning the art, I guess. The other thing is I just think Christensen makes such a difference to our ability to win the ball in close, but also to get it cleanly to outside runners. Like, he's so good, not just tunneling the ball out, but just that extra step and having the composure to find and hit a target. That I think he was a huge loss. And so we just never got our best midfield on the park, and they're pretty young and inexperienced as it is.
What do you think, Pierre?
I would agree with that. I think, I do think, and I won't harp on it, but I think the lack of a, probably not a dominant ruckman, because a lot of teams get away without a dominant one. Even Sydney don't have a dominant ruckman. They made a grand final, but the lack of a largely competitive ruckman has a lot to do with that, because it messes your clearance setups, because you can't plan for where the ball's going to go. And I think a lot of this year our midfield looked from my view, genuinely disorganised. And I think there's a flow-on effect with that. But I agree with SJ in particular. I think really we had a lot of issues with injuries, and I thought probably the only games, probably the North game and part of the second Hawthorn game, I thought that was the only time I really felt that our midfield was genuinely competitive. And it wasn't surprising that it was basically because Caddy was fit enough after missing most of the year. That was that very late part of the year was when he started to increase his disposal count dramatically. We got Christensen back. We started to look like we could actually win the ball and use it out of a stoppage, even though our stoppage numbers were still low. I think without those guys there all year, we really lacked the ability to build what we needed, because we don't have the depth under them. Like, if you look at the guys that we just delisted off the list, and I know we'll probably talk about that later, but most of those guys were what you'd call average depth midfielders who wouldn't really get a lot of games anywhere. So we didn't have much below them. We needed those guys to be fit all year, and most of them weren't.
I think the other thing there is as well, just touching on that topic, is that if you look at those 7 and compare them to maybe the best 7 at most clubs, although I'll say Hawthorn's probably a bit different, and they're sort of more like us. But generally, a premiership winning team does not have midfielders who are 31, 32, 22, 21, and 20. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With obviously the captain there in the middle. And so, you expect they're not going to be bringing their A game every week. Some of them are either a bit slow or a bit weak or a bit of both. And I think when they don't all play, or actually, let's look at when they do all play, like in that North Melbourne game, it means that they're winning enough of the ball that then the flow-on effect is down to Murdoch, who probably had his best game of the year in that game, where he can all of a sudden get his hand on the footy because he's an outside player and he relies on players getting it to him. Whereas in the finals, Murdoch was very close to being invisible because we just didn't get enough of that ball out to the outside players to do their thing because we were missing that engine room.
Definitely. We'll move on now to the coaching this season. How do we rate the performance of the coaching staff as a whole, and in particular, Chris Scott? Who wants to kick us off?
Oh, yeah, I will.
Yep.
Look, the coaches have to come under scrutiny because, we've gone out in straight sets again, especially after, weeks of really bizarre rhetoric about, we think our best is good enough and how dare the media write us off, which I thought was particularly strange given that in his premiership year, Scott took the exact opposite approach and constantly downplayed our chances and said, no, we just want to compete and blah, blah, blah. So I think that would almost be my biggest gripe, is that it would be nice to get some clear explanations, because he is the absolute master at, saying a great deal while actually saying nothing. And like his post-match press conference was after the North game, where he said, I don't want to explain it because I'm too emotional. Which on one level is fair enough, but then if you're going to say that, it would be nice if you at a later point took the opportunity to actually explain what you think went wrong to fans.
Yep.
And I guess his other sort of defense against that has been, I don't want to give too much away, like, loose lips sink ships. But when the ship has sunk, I think it is actually fair enough to then say, okay, here are the things that went wrong and here are the things we need to improve on.
Well,
that said, I don't think he should be sacked or anything like that. I think, that's a big overreaction. But yeah, it would just be nice to have some coherent explanations.
Going back to your very first point there, I thought he was actually very frank in the way he was saying we believe our best is good enough, because I think SJ brought up the point earlier. This was the season that we would have needed our absolute best 22, everything to just go our way. And unfortunately, that just didn't happen. And, going back to that North game again, around that stage, it looked like there might be a chance that might happen this year. And those kind of comments were, to an extent, correct. But it just so happened that whatever could go wrong did go wrong going into finals, and we all know what happened from there.
I think you're right. Like, I think your assessment is right. If we were gonna win, everything had to go right. I guess my problem with our best is good enough is that, Paul Roos could say that about Melbourne and he wouldn't technically be wrong, because by definition, if you're beating everyone above you, then it is your best. So like your best is always good enough because it is your best.
Right. Yeah.
So So I know there's been a lot of cynicism from Biggie Boy and Partridge. They've loved trotting out the mission accomplished and our best is good enough line. And I disagree with them on his actual coaching position, but I think they're right there that at a certain point that phrase has become a bit trite and we need something a bit more. Well, I was about to say honest, but then again, you get the sense they do actually believe that in the club. So anyway, I've said my bit.
Yep. Pio?
Look, I suppose I'd separate concepts. I am critical of the coaching staff for a number of things this year, but to be honest, I don't know if I would. I understand where TJ's coming from, and he has a point up to a point, because I think, it's kind of, it misses the point if your best is good enough, because, any team, North Melbourne could say, look, our best is going to be good enough and we're going to win a premiership, but really it's consistency, and we didn't have consistency this year. So it kind of misses the point. But having said that, I wouldn't rag on the coaches too much. I heard Chris Scott do a press conference, I think about 2/3 of the way through the year with Fox Footy, where he was asked basically, what's your approach to everyone saying, oh, Geelong's going to fail, Geelong's going to fail. And he said, look, everyone said that since the first month I got here, and I realised that eventually they're going to be right. So I think the coach is fairly realistic about where we're at, and I think sometimes people, Partridge in particular, they pick apart media statements too much. Like what else is he going to say? Is he going to say, well, our best is never good enough? A coach is not going to say that. So when he says that, in a lot of ways, I think he's really saying nothing. And I think to pick it apart too much, places too much weight on it, I wouldn't. But having said that, I think I'd give our coaches maybe a 7 out of 10 this year. I don't realistically think that we could have actually won the premiership even if we had everyone fit. I don't think we've really got the demographics quite to do it. So I think for the coaches to actually put us in the top 4 again is a very good achievement. But I thought there were a lot of things they could have done better.
Was there anything in particular that really stood out to anybody? I'll go to SJ here. The one for me was Taylor going forward in that final. I think it was the qualifying final against Hawthorn just after halftime. SJ?
Do we call that Plan B? Is that our Plan B these days?
Well, that seems to be the media Plan B. Which
Plan B, and there is no Plan C. No, look, that was a pretty bizarre move to me, being there live. Now, I'm not sure if something had happened at halftime, but considering Walker had just kicked a goal on the halftime siren, had taken 3 good clunks in the first half.
Oh.
Like he wasn't playing a match-winning role, but he was at that point the best tall forward on the ground.
Well, he looked to be having a bit of a breakout kind of performance.
That's right.
He was a real standout for us in that first half.
And he actually played well in patches the week before against Brisbane in his first game, possibly for the year, or at least for a long time. And then for him to, I actually remember speaking to someone 20 minutes into the third quarter, and I said, is Walker still on the ground? And I realised he'd been moved to this sort of, but he was just playing this sort of ruck half back sort of third man up type role, and I thought, this is bizarre. And Taylor's never kicked a goal against a good team, I don't think. Certainly not when the game's there that he won. And that probably rolled into the fact that Walker was in the ruck, and then Blitzars was playing on a wing, and then Brad Hill was getting touches against Blitzars, and this sort of domino effect was just quite bizarre. Look, obviously they must have felt like, even though the scores were level at half time, something needed to change. And maybe they were right. Maybe we would have lost anyway. But I mean, I definitely would have kept Josh Walker at that sort of centre half forward role where he was presenting up and flying for marks. And if he wasn't taking them, creating a contest so that Hawthorn's well-renowned intercept marking game couldn't happen. And probably helping Hawkins to be more isolated.
Yeah.
Look, well, at the time, I thought it was sort of, they couldn't get Taylor, isolate Taylor floating off to get his own intercept mark game going, so they threw him forward. But that's still a failure of coaching. He's more damaging down back as an All-Australian centre-half back who can rebound really effectively than he's ever going to be up forward.
And does this also play into the fact that we've got too many tall defenders, and that if we don't have a match-up for one goes forward? However, they're all defenders, and the root problem is the fact that we actually need probably a little bit more flexibility in the back line rather than loading it up with talls.
Yeah. Well, I saw it, I think you touched on it a little bit just before, I saw it quite simply as a roll of the dice. Like, that first half, sure, the scores were just about level at halftime, or they were level, I can't quite remember. But it looked like Hawthorn were just on top in that game. And it was just something dramatic needed to change. And Taylor, he's been taking great, strong contested marks all year. I saw it as a very brave move, high risk, high reward. And it turned out the risk was the side that that came back to bite us, I guess.
Mm.
The only other thing I would say in relation to that, and I think, I called this to some people I was talking to at half time, because I noticed that even for a bloke who's like a tortoise, McIntosh couldn't get near anything. We now know that they played him injured, and the coach, and we didn't know that at the time, but the coaches knew that at half time, and they knew pretty much that they'd made the wrong decision to take him in, but they couldn't. With the risk, they couldn't sub him at half time. You can't sub him that early. They had to wait till 3/4 time. And I think that would have thrown the tools out, because then Walker is the best tool in the side for covering ground. So all of a sudden he has to cover that ground, because McIntosh still kind of has to float on the bench but can't cover anything until we can sub him. And then everything else goes out of sync. So if I would be more critical of them playing Taylor forward if I see them doing it next year. I think a lot of it in the Hawthorn game had to do with what happened on the night. Yeah. And that's another issue I'd like to touch on later in regards to, not having any rucks and picking the wrong blokes. I think they would have had a coaching discussion at halftime and gone, oh, crap, we have to throw the jigsaw around because now our tool's gone. And that might have had a lot to do with it.
Well, we'll move on now to a bit of list management discussion. And Mitch Clark, obviously, is the big one. We know he can play a bit of ruck himself, but the talk is that he'll be brought in to play forward. We'll touch on that in a sec. But first of all, what are our thoughts on adding Mitch Clark to the likes of Menzel, Simpson, McIntosh, Vardy and Cowan? An absolute arsenal of injury-prone players there.
Well, I mean, it's just hard from our outside perspective, because we haven't got an actual, we haven't got the medical diagnosis. And like, for all we know, there's a surgeon sitting somewhere in Melbourne telling the club he's fine, he'll be, it shouldn't be a reoccurring problem. Whereas, you look at someone like Menzel and clearly it is a reoccurring problem. And so he could be a totally different kettle of fish and actually, is really injury prone. So, yeah, it's a risk. But I guess given the cost and the fact that it sounds like they're not going to pay him much, I'm leaning in favour.
What do you think, Pierre?
Look, I think initially when I first heard it, I was a bit against it, but I was thinking more about this today, and it did occur to me because we haven't seen Clark play for 2 years, so I've forgotten him a bit, and I remember he was a good player, but I still can't forget. I did actually. Someone pointed out to me today, when you look at where and when he was drafted as a top 10 pick, I think it was 2005. He's actually only a year older than Hawkins and Selwood. Yeah. And that made me think twice, because I thought, Hawkins next year will get a hugely long-term deal. Like, we'll give him 4 or 5 years or something like that. And we expect him to be here for a long time. We expect Selwood to be here for a long time. And I'm not saying Clark will play that long, but also that's the age group we don't have players in. And so, that's why you're starting to see kind of Selwood and Hawkins, in my opinion, kind of have to carry the team. So it made me think, and I thought, well, look, I have to give the coaching staff and probably more the list management staff some credit. They've obviously pulled Clark out from under Collingwood's nose, which is pretty good effort and says good things. Yeah. But they've spent a lot of time targeting 2 players from Melbourne who are both aged 26, and we don't have any 26-year-olds who are decent. So I still am pretty nervous about how he's going to turn out. The injuries worry me, but the strategy, I can see the merit in it.
SJ, do you have anything to add to that? And what do you think of his potential impact on our forward line / ruck division?
I'm a very conservative person, so I don't like taking risks at the best of times. I will say that if you're going to take a risk, this isn't a bad one to take. However, given the already precarious position on our list in regards to the players you mentioned, say we had none of those 5 or 6 injury-prone players on the list and we were back in 2007, maybe, I would go for Mitch Clark, definitely. But it's sort of the state of the list that gets me, and there's only so many ruckmen you can have on your list, or even talls. Yeah. And I just worry that we're going to be in the same situation next year. McIntosh will break down, Clark will break down, and it's just like, it's so frustrating to me when that happens. Now, in saying that, Clark has a lot of upside, more upside than McIntosh when we got him, more upside than Rivers when we got him. And so because of that, and because of the fact that we're sort of got a gaping hole at the moment at centre half forward / ruck, and this guy plays both of those positions, I can see what they're trying to do. The guy kicked... I've actually watched him play a lot in the past couple of years at Melbourne, and he's a very good player. He kicked 29 goals in 11 games for Melbourne in 2012 when they were like one of the weakest teams I've ever seen.
Yeah.
He's a very aggressive, athletic, tall man who can do the lot. He's good at ground level. However, just looking at his figures, he's played 97 games in 8 years. So that's like 12 a year. Now that says something. And I'm just worried that we're going to end up with another Hamish McIntosh.
Well, that's the real worry there, isn't it? Because obviously the obvious thing is that he's coming in to play forward. But then if we're in the same situation with the ruck next year, you've got, McIntosh could break down again, Simpson could break down again. This is probably another guy that's just going to end up, a tall guy that's just going to end up getting thrown in the ruck there. And we'll just be adding sort of another precariously injured player to be relied upon for that position. When really, if we were to go after a tall, as you said, it's frustrating to not just have that durable, I want to say Trent West type player that you can just count on to consistently.
I feel like we're back in 2013.
We did a podcast on that.
But having said that, if he comes in, he plays forward. As you said, the upside greatly outweighs the risk here because he has the potential to kick 50, 60 goals alongside Tom Hawkins. And this could be a very, very scary forward line if we pull this off.
And the other thing too, we bemoaned, I think, all year as supporters. We said, and I think we could see that a number of problems with our forward line, but we all bemoaned we had no link between the midfield and Hawkins. We lacked a forward who could really quickly lead up, get the ball, and then cover ground the other way. And we were always breaking down across half forward. And Clark at his best, and Esto touched on that, he is, if you ever wanted a bloke 200 centimetres who could do that, he's your guy. Because, yes, he can take pack marks. He can do similar stuff in a way that Hawkins does. But he also, when he was playing well at Brisbane, he covered a hell of a lot of ground. And he was a very, very, very good link player because I haven't seen many guys of that size who can actually, pressure that well when they don't have the ball. So I can kind of see what they're trying to do because we actually do lack that sort of player in our front half. But it's probably the hardest thing for me is I don't have full faith in our medical staff given some of the other players we have. But I can see what they're trying to do. He's not a square peg in a round hole when you look at what we need and what we don't have.
And that's an interesting point you've brought up that they're on the back of all these sort of injured players and also bringing in Mitch Clark, they're simultaneously revamping the high performance department. So I suspect that from Scotty's reactions to Steve Johnson's performance in the finals, I suspect there was by the end of the season, there was a bit of a lack of faith by the coaches in the prognosis of the medical staff or something similar because he seemed genuinely blindsided by Johnson pulling up lane. So hopefully they've got the people in place and the structure in place to be able to adequately assess whether or not he's fit and ready to go.
And just quickly before we move on from Clark, where does this leave Josh Walker, Nathan Vardy, and Mitch Brown?
I think Brown. Sorry, SJ.
Oh no, I was going to say you've got the good oil on this PO. So
no, it's just I know SJ and I have talked about this for many years, and we went to the VFL together a few times back when Mitch Brown. We really had hopes for him, and I know how much SJ loves Mitch Brown. So I don't
love him. I just think he's got talent.
I know, but we always used to talk about this guy has real ability and he's not a plotter like Ryan Gamble, and it's actually true.
No.
He does have real ability, but I think if you kind of wanted an understanding that Brown and Geelong are probably square peg in round hole, it's probably the fact that they're going to pluck someone like Clark and trade a pick for him. So Brown, no, I think gone. Walker is different. I think one of the most interesting things I thought about the end of the season, I've been trying to look for positives, but he actually went from looking like probably the worst ruckman I have ever seen to something probably half resembling Trent West. Like, not quite there, but, getting, like, seriously, people laugh, but he was actually vaguely competitive. So
he was.
His ability to do other roles like that, and he had to do that when we lost McIntosh, he'll get enough games somewhere. And that's the problem that Brown has. Brown can't kind of present that sort of thing to the coaching staff. So, hopefully he's still on our list next year, Walker, but I think he'll still get enough games. And I think unless we trade, the only reason Walker wouldn't get a lot of games is if we trade in a more durable ruckman, which we may still do. Because if we don't, if you look at, McIntosh, Simpson might retire, Clark, realistically, are all those guys going to play enough games that Walker's not going to need to play in the ruck? No. So I think he'll play anyway.
Yep. The really interesting one for me is Nathan Vardy, because he's one that I've looked at as the certainty to come in and play centre half forward. And then I was really surprised and then later excited to hear about the Mitch Clark situation. But where does that leave Nathan Vardy, who is, well, seemingly in most people's minds, I think, from my general perception of things, the next best thing at centre half forward?
Well, I think you play him at second ruck so that Mark Blitzarves can maximise his running patterns and truly show us what he's made out of.
Oh, wow. I think when you've got a player with coming off an ACL, you can't have high expectations in his first year back, that's for sure, particularly when they're a big guy.
Okay. So whatever we get out of him in 2015, we're happy with.
Hopefully he comes on, but he's not going to be a star in 2015.
Yeah. Anyway, moving on to some other players. Well, we've already touched on Mitch Brown, but the other three really are Taylor Hunt, Josh Cowan, and Travis Varco. Do we see them staying with the club? And if they do, what is their role going forward? PO, I'll go to you.
Well, I suppose I'll go first to last. Taylor Hunt very much is going, which I'm a fan of his. I was always a fan of his, and I still feel we actually lack a good defensive midfielder. And I actually thought he showed real aptitude for it. But anyway, I think I listened to Barnes' comments yesterday, and I think it was very polite Geelong-ish. Yeah, we're not going to delist you, but you can do what you like. Like when he was asked about Taylor Hunt, that was pretty much his equivalent response. And so I think, you look at it from the club side, you look at it from Hunt's side, he wants more opportunities and he's a decent player. He'll find a club. He'll definitely be on a list next year. I don't think it'll be ours. They haven't, I don't know. TJ can probably update me. I've been a bit out of the news, but it seems from what I've heard that Cowan is going to stay, which I find pretty surprising.
Yep.
Particularly given if we're going to bring in Clark and we're still going to hang on to McIntosh because he's got another year on his contract. I would put Cowan on the rookie list if it was me, but anyway, that's not my decision. So I think it sounds like he'll still be with us. And obviously, considering that they got rid of Stringer and Schroeder, that probably indicates, basically only one out of Cowan and those two was going to survive. So obviously it seems like they've gone for Cowan, I think.
Yeah. And Travis Varco? Go on.
Sorry, Cowan's had his contract extended. So
he has had his contract extended.
I just hadn't heard. I wasn't sure. I'd read a lot that, that seemed to be what the club wanted to do. I just hadn't heard of that. Look, I think with Varco, I still expect him to be here next year, but I think there could be some movement in trade week. I think the club is not going to be stupid, particularly if if they're looking at free agents again, and let's be honest, you'd have to be a pretty dumb club if you weren't trying to get Dangerfield. You'd be pretty stupid, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you don't, therefore, if you were to pull off a good free agent and Varco goes, you get no compensation anyway. And I think that's something that a lot of people have ignored in saying, oh, well, why in the heck would you trade Varco, et cetera, et cetera. You have to look at it pragmatically. You have to look at free agency. So I expect him to be here next year because I haven't heard any news to indicate otherwise, but I certainly think he's tradable if someone offers something decent.
TJ, do you have anything to add there?
Well, someone posted something on the forum today that I have no idea of its legitimacy that suggested that Varco and Hunt had turned down offers to be the piece that moved the other way in the Mitch Clark trade.
Right.
So, and I think there's a suggestion that they might want to move Varco for a bit of salary cap relief. But yeah, I think it's a shame. It's a shame Hunt will leave. Tidy player in the sort of age bracket we need, but for whatever reason, they clearly don't rate him. Or if he wasn't getting an opportunity at the end of last year, then he's just not going to get an opportunity. And I guess the thing about Varco is I thought, he's a divisive player. I thought he played much better in finals, but I think SJ, you sort of showed in the middle of the year that, or questioned, is he going to get any better? Like he should be in his prime, and he's only getting sort of a comparative handful of disposals. Do we want to hold on to him? And I thought in finals, like he was playing well, but it was because he was creating contests and he was almost playing this really scrappy role. And he's not in the team for that. He's in the team because he's supposed to be this sort of Rolls Royce who can run at pace the length of the ground and deliver the ball really accurately. And I mean, he's covered in strapping these days. So maybe it's just his body's not what it was. But yeah, you do wonder if the best we can get out of him is this sort of scrappy defender, then is he worth keeping?
Yeah. I guess I'll put Varco and I think Varco and Taylor Hunt have got similar stories for me, because I think both of them, Varco was sort of missed all 2012, but at the start of 2013, both Taylor Hunt and Varco were actually in really good form, and both had serious injuries where they missed quite a bit of footy, came back straight away, looked like a fish out of water, never got dropped, I don't think, and sort of spotted their way into the end of the season. And, Varco played in the finals and Varco, I think, was very poor last year, and Taylor Hunt eventually got dropped, never to be seen again. Now, I don't know if they were given the best chance to return. They seem to lose a lot of confidence after those injuries. Clearly, Varco is a huge confidence player. Taylor Hunt sort of never got back to what he's good at. And I was just wondering, even this year, like with Taylor Hunt, we were crying out. For me, I think we need young, small to medium-sized defenders. Taylor Hunt was playing the Guthrie role a few years ago. He started as a back pocket. He then moved into the midfield. He never got to go down back. Jed Hughes came in for a few games, but we ended up going back to your Kelly, Enright, old combo. So he's out of favour, but I'm just not sure if we ever actually brought these guys back in through the right channels rather than rushing them back in. I think Taylor Hunt had a broken collarbone, and he was back in a couple of weeks, first week back after sort of being ticked, right, you're okay. They seem to sort of struggled ever since then, and Varco's the same. You look at his numbers, and it actually makes me sad. I know he's playing a different role now. I know he's playing the back line, but, a lot of players can be attacking out of the back line. And this is a guy that in 2009-10-11 had 22, 14 and 25 bounces across those seasons. The last two seasons he's had 6 and 5.
Yeah.
Like he just isn't. There's no attacking flair to his game. He's not getting involved in almost any scoring chains. He's sort of playing a lockdown defender, and clearly his two best skills are his sort of carry of the ball and delivery. and for whatever reason now it just seems to be it's just perished. It's just we don't see it at all. So maybe it's time to move them on. I'm very reluctant to move players on, but I sort of felt like they haven't been handled in the best way, and maybe it's just past that point of no return now.
Guys, do we have any closing thoughts on that?
Yeah, just briefly. I agree with a lot of what SJ says. Although I probably would say I actually thought Varco was pretty good in the two finals. And one thing that I'd previously been very critical about him for was his lack of willingness to actually bump players and execute tackles. And it was actually one thing he did really well at the back end of this year. He seems to have lost his confidence to actually attack the other way. But I actually felt for the first time he wasn't actually a liability in terms of defending an opponent and defending space, which I think is a really good achievement. So I think he played really well. But what I was thinking when TJ was talking was saying, he made a good point to say, look, Varco is a useful player, but is he good enough at his age, because he's in his prime age at 26, that you would break the bank for? And I think the answer is no. Like, if a club wanted your Tom Hawkins or guys like that, you break the bank to keep them. I don't actually think the club is desperate to get rid of Varco, but if someone else offered him good money, you wouldn't, on the basis of what he's delivering now, which is pretty mid-range, you wouldn't be desperate to pay more money in your salary cap and keep him, because really you have young players in the third or fourth year who can probably give you what Varco's giving you. And so pragmatically, that's how I would look at it. I still probably think it's more likely than not that he's here next year, but I think clearly the club is open to, hey, look, if someone wants to give us a good offer, yeah, we'll do that.
Well, on that, I think I'm going to have to call time on it, guys. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. It's been good. A little bit rusty.
Thanks for having us, mate.
A little bit rusty
No,
on the first one back, but I'm sure we'll improve there. And we'll probably go around again in a couple of weeks, I guess.
We will.
Yeah, I think we have to have a national draft preview.
We do. We do.
Yeah, because
If
the
we have
last
any
one.
draft picks by then. If we didn't trade them all for Mitch Clark.
Well, SJ, PO, TJ, thanks very much. My name's Gyson, and we'll see you next